Hey everybody, your friendly neighborhood artistic director Mark Fewer here. Welcome to the show. Today we're talking with Leslie Ting. You know, I used to think, I'll admit something to you right now, and that is when I would read bios for people at, let's say, summer music festivals or any given concert. As a violinist, I would read something and I'd see this line come up over and over and over again, and the line would say, "So and so leads a varied musical life, playing concertmaster, soloist, chamber musician, and orchestral player." And there was a little side of me that always thought, how is that varied? You're just playing violin. And of course, I understand the roles and I've done all of them. A lot of people have. But our guest today, Leslie, is somebody who has taken the idea of being varied and turned it on its ear. And in fact, she's kind of an example of somebody. We're seeing this more and more in the music world. We're seeing people come back to music maybe after a time away, and music then having a different meaning for them. And it's something really beautiful and wonderful, and people are coming up with incredible things that they then want to share, oftentimes tied to life experience. And this is the case with Leslie. So Leslie's here with us. She's in the K Dubs, as people like to say. Some people like to say Kitchener Waterloo. Hi, Leslie. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Mark. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure to have you. Happy Father's Day.
Happy Father's Day. That's why I'm in Kitchener.
That's right. So, let's get the easy stuff out of the way. Where were you when the Raptors won?
In Toronto at home.
You were. And
yes.
And did you notice like sirens blaring after it was all over?
Oh yeah, fireworks. Yeah, cheering in like neighbors' homes. Oh yeah.
See, I was in the United States on the West Coast, and I went to my partner and I. We went to a bar. We managed to see the second half of the game, and to our surprise, probably about 40% of the people in the bar were cheering for the Raptors.
Wow, that's awesome.
And we're talking in California too. So
wow.
Yeah, it's an incredibly good feel story, I think. So, hey, let's talk about your great show that you're bringing to us at Stratford Summer Music called.
Okay.
I know, I don't know you that well, but I know you, and I know your work a little bit. And I wonder if you might just kind of tell us a little bit about the backstory and how you came to seeing yourself coming. I know I want you to talk a little bit about leaving music and coming back to music, and then what that process was like for yourself, and then coming up with this whole project idea.
Okay, so I'll start with speculation and sort of how that idea came about. So I was practicing for an orchestra audition actually, and I was thinking to myself, don't forget that the jury is going to be behind a screen and they won't be able to see you. Something in my optometry brain switched on, and I thought, oh, there are people who live with never being able to see who's playing in front of them. And at that time, my mother had passed away maybe two years ago, roughly 2 or 3 years ago. And I guess I wanted to reach out to the low vision and blind community. I had noticed that when my mother lost her vision, and it happened over a number of years, that her social life and her independence certainly sort of got diminished, and it was harder for her to go out and go to things without a lot of planning and sort of not knowing how accessible things were, and it was just overall more challenging. And so I had, initially the idea was to have a kind of outreach, community outreach concert with maybe the Canadian National Institute for the Blind or something like that. That was my initial idea, and I had been reading a biography on John Cage, and I had, he'd been talking, I'd been reading about how he thought about listening and more awareness and being more open to different sounds, as not just that the idea of music being beautiful was something of a judgment call on our part, and that maybe other kinds of sounds could be included in that. And I thought about people who lost their vision, and certainly the more of the dependence that people would they would depend more heavily on hearing to guide themselves, and that's just a natural thing that happens. So I had this idea, and I was thinking about Beethoven and using his hearing and how that might be an interesting, there's a bit of a sensory parallel there. So I thought, okay, I'll make this show with Beethoven and John Cage, and I'll give a kind of the usual historical contextual spiel about the composer's lives and play this concert. And I also had this idea of having lighting that would reflect the experience of vision loss. And maybe, I knew that I would need some funding, and I thought this might be a good project for a funding grant. So I got some help from a grant writer, and I got to the sort of artistic statement part of it. And, I had written about how I had been an optometrist and how, so I was also making the switch away from optometry. By that time, I'd sort of given up my license, and I was fully in music. And, I thought that was also I knew that would be a nice thing to put in about my background in vision. And I hadn't written anything about my mother, and the grant writer kept asking me, why are you doing this? And I wrote down everything I just told you, and she she wouldn't let me go on it. And then finally I said, well, okay, my mother lost her vision, and I witnessed her go through it, and sort of happening socially. And she said, oh, that's why you're doing this show. And just the way she reacted to it made me realize that might be an important, maybe interesting, slightly different part of the show that I maybe should include. So she kind of planted the seed of taking the show a step beyond a more traditional recital. And then sort of the next step for me was that I wanted to interview people who'd gone through vision loss. I wanted to know if what I witnessed in my mother going through it was specific to her, or if other, how much of it was common to other people who went through it. And I wrote down every visual description they told me, everything I knew as an optometrist, everything I saw my mother go through, and what she described to me, like green halos around lights, for example, when she had a flare-up. And I wanted different lighting and video designers to create the show. Idealistic idea, but I did it. I would get a different lighting and video designer to create the show, because I wanted different people to have the opportunity to imagine this world, partially because I think it's a bit scary for people to imagine it. And I felt like if maybe people were able to imagine it a little bit longer, that they would, not that they would fully understand per se, but maybe a little bit, like just enough, a bit further on the sort of empathy path that I think would have meant a lot to my mother, to anyone with vision loss, just this idea of, I don't know, I think because it's so scary, because vision in general is it's hard to understand. It's not common knowledge how the eye works, and imagining it is a bit scary if something goes wrong with I feel a lot how people, the relationship people had with their vision. So I thought it would be really interesting to have people, artists who worked really in the visual world, to spend time imagining the experience of vision loss and to create something out of that. Right. And so I did have that done with a new lighting video designer about 4 times. And then for my own production sanity, I've decided to kind of lock down the show a little bit more. And the show that I'll be doing, the version I'll be doing in Stratford, is the one that I'll be doing from here on, when hopefully I have my world tour.
Fantastic. Hey, so after hearing what you just said, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
I've been hearing for most of my adult life, people talk about, oh, we're becoming more visual. Oh, we're becoming more visual. Everything's more visual. Yeah. I have to admit that I find that I am in the minority when I say that I believe that, in fact, we're being hoodwinked by making everything more visual, and that, in fact, the ability to listen deeply is something that we're losing in spades these days.
Mm.
Is that also your sense of things as you've gone through this process, that the way in which the senses operate, in particular hearing, and as we listen to music, the depth of clarity or focus we can give the act of listening is something that is really being lost, and is being told that, we're kind of being told by the world around us, well, of course it's happening, we're becoming more visual, as if that's natural and good.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that in the, if you're driving, for example, and it's really rainy, do you notice like you need to turn down the radio like, to see more clearly? Like, and I think vision is more immediate and maybe more direct in a lot of ways, certainly. And even just if you're just talking about listening on its own, like sometimes I'll be listening to someone, but if I'm in my head thinking about something else, like I haven't heard a word they've said.
Right.
I think it takes a different kind of awareness, and it takes practice to use it, certainly. And maybe that's all the more reason that it's scarier for people to think about anything going wrong. Or if something does, even if people came in and I needed to change their prescription a little bit, I could sort of feel the, nervousness people had around something having changed in their vision and not knowing what it was, because, you can't look in your own eye either. So, it's a kind of a mystery to people, I think, vision in general, and perhaps is taken for granted. And I don't know if you've heard this, but I had also read some headlines not that long ago that pop music in volume is being turned up. Like, it's simpler, but the volume is going up as a way of getting our attention, which is, I mean, it's not necessary, I don't think.
That would fall into line with what they do at the Harvard Business School, and have been training there for over 100 years. You have to be the loudest and the first one in the room in order to succeed. And it sounds crass, but that's exactly what they teach. And you could say that is a negative force in our world if you look at it from a certain perspective. But those who maybe are successful in the business world and use that technique, well, they do that. I read a wonderful book called The Attention Merchants by Tim Wu, which I highly recommend, which is all about this. I think the subtitle of the book was something like The Epic Struggle to Get Inside Our Minds, and the way in which companies are always looking for ways to get our attention and therefore our pocketbook. Okay, so let me ask you about the choice of music that you're using for speculation. How did you come up with these choices? You mentioned already source of inspiration being John Cage, but the other works that we're going to hear on this show.
So Beethoven. So Beethoven, having lost his hearing, I think is, again, one of those like famous stories that we all, lots of people know. And again, I think take for granted a little bit how incredible what he created in light of that.
Right.
And again, that parallel of losing a sense and what that means, I think I saw in reading his will, that Heiligenstadt Testament, and the letters he wrote to friends when it was slowly happening, the things he described, like the feelings he described, how hard it was for him socially and psychologically, really echoed what people told me in those interviews of the people who lost their vision, and what I sort of saw my mother go through. It really sounded like the same thing, a kind of grief that they were both going through. And so the pieces I chose are, it's a little bit based on instrumentation, and also it's not exactly that I'm trying to say that, look, this piece reflects this feeling. It's more a presentation of this is the output sort of at the same time as what he was feeling and what he was going through at this time. But it's not, I don't think necessarily it's a direct correlation either. And I guess when I was talking to people that were going through vision loss, they got a bit tired of being identified always with that loss, with, a lot of people hesitate to use their white cane because they didn't want that to be the only thing people saw about them. And my mother got quite tired about talking about the vision loss also. This sort of catch-22 of doing that, of like not showing your cane or sort of not talking about it, is that it becomes kind of an invisible disability then, and people suddenly don't know what your needs are as far as vision, or, you know, if they don't know you can't see that clear glass of water in front of you, you know, then you might end up knocking it over if they don't know that you have a vision loss, or something like that. But yeah, so that's kind of where I was coming at with the Beethoven, that yes, he did lose his hearing, but also this incredible music he created, and this like full life that he had, and this full person he was, not just a composer who lost his hearing.
I was just maybe 2 weeks ago performing with a group. We were playing Beethoven Opus 131. And for those who are listening to this program, they don't know what that is. 131 is one of 5 late quartets by Beethoven, written at a time when he had, you know, long since basically lost most of his abilities. And it's considered one of his greatest ever works. It's personal to a level that, you know, if you're a fan of Beethoven's symphonies, the symphonies are amazing and I love them all. But Opus 131 is so personal that even after having played that piece now for better part of 25 years of my life, I still have mysteries, you know, the big questions that I ask about, the questions in the score that I don't really understand. And yes, there's the temptation sometimes to say, okay, well, wait a second. Maybe if I was blind and deaf, or maybe if, you know, you take away some of those sensory ideas. And the thing for me, though, that is fascinating about that as a process is that even if you take those things into consideration, there's still a level of being human about the expressiveness of the art form that is always there, regardless of which sense has been taken away.
Yeah, exactly. And I think after like several interviews, I had this feeling, like exactly what you're saying. I couldn't quite word it at the time, but just this feeling that that each person, this like human spirit that was constant the whole time, that had nothing to do with like of course the great loss of losing your sight and everything that came with that. But I also felt like, boy, there was just something underlying that has nothing to do with that. And and finally I sort of ended up applying that to my mother. And I noticed sort of at a certain point that I had asked people all these questions about their whole lives. What it was like when they first started losing their vision. How did their family react? What did they do for work? And I hadn't really this question around my mother. And in the course of researching and developing the show, I went back and I interviewed my mother's ophthalmologist, who she'd seen quite a lot, but I wasn't in the room for a lot of those appointments, and they very kindly talked to me about that. And I also went back and talked to my mother's family, her siblings that I really didn't know very well, but they would have known more about her childhood than I did. And in that, I got to go through this journey of empathy again. But then, you know, I had this sort of general empathy, this like more superficial level of empathy and understanding from being an optometrist and seeing my mother go through it. And then there was this other journey that happened again just for myself with my mother. And that part was really surprising to me in creating the work.
Wow, what a beautiful thing. You know, today being Father's Day, one of my cousins who actually works at the Stratford Festival Theater, she and I were messengering each other today, and because we were hoping to get together for coffee, but because it's Father's Day, I was thinking of her father, my uncle, who was also my godfather growing up, and my father, who are both of which have passed on. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that my father and my uncle did was whistle. They were both huge whistlers. And yeah, I know it sounds funny, but like I can't think of my father without thinking about him whistling somehow. And my cousin Marie, when we were messengering, I said, "Happy Father's Day," etc. I said, "I'm thinking of your dad." And she said, "I think of our dads all the time, but I'm sure they're both somewhere whistling together right now." And it's again, like whistling is something that, because you can't put words to whistling, whistling is something that is as pure of an expression, I think, as singing just an open vowel of some sort or whatever. Because once you assign word to something, you're assigning the possibility of a variety of meanings.
Yeah.
People will then have a variety of contexts to interpret it from. But the idea of this being in a situation where you have a sense that's taken away, you may feel like there's a sense of being deprived, but there's another layer to it too, which is you are being forced to actually take a deeper look within of what it is that makes you human, which is incredibly beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. Or you just said something that made me think about it's this idea of words, and I think with this show also there was another sort of like layer of something that I wanted to show in relation to this idea of it's the sort of the reason I had wanted different lighting designers to design on the show. And also I've never meant for this piece to be an advocacy piece. It's never, I've always wanted it to be more about, this isn't a show necessarily about showing you about vision loss and teaching you about that. That's kind of this inadvertent side effect. I mostly wanted to get people of all different levels of vision in a room together and to share this experience together that was not like a lecture around vision loss or anything like that. I think that words are good, and I certainly talk a lot. There's a whole monologue in this show, certainly, and I do talk a lot about my relationship with my mother and the lives of Beethoven and John Cage, but half the show is music. And there's something about, I think there's a lot of information, sort of each of information. I kind of wanted there to be time and space and a different use of your listening to come into play and sort of let some of that like verbal information rest. And to have the visuals is something that is not necessarily explained anywhere, but it was something that I wanted people to feel. Right. And it's an artistic rendering of this experience of vision loss. It was more about feeling and shape, and it's not about a very direct tunnel vision or people putting on sunglasses and anything like that. It's really more about the feeling that you might experience during it.
Well, it's an amazing thing, and I have to tell you, I can't wait to experience it myself very soon, coming up this summer. So before we let you go, we're going to ask you our questions, okay. Our kind of regular doodad here. And my first question is, I know, of course, you've spent so many years as a violin player before you became an optometrist, but do you have memories as a child? First question being, what's your earliest memory of music?
So since I'm in Kitchener, I dug up this very early photo of me. I actually wish this was my first memory. It's not, because I'm too young, but
oh, look at that. So look at the smile on your face too. That's so great.
So I'm about a year old here, and I'm told that I was listening to ABBA.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Oh, but actually,
happy face.
Yeah. But the actual, I think, my early memories, I think, are like of my parents playing records of Kyung Wha Chung and Itzhak Perlman, and I recall a lot of Tchaikovsky violin concerto.
Okay.
And that was kind of always around. So I would say, that's probably my earliest memory.
So a little bit of along with Mamma Mia at the same time. Cool. Okay, so now at this point in your life, tell me this is the second question, of course. What does music mean for you now?
So I would say that music, I guess, sort of continuing on that line of thought around words versus music. It's a language that I think I also use for myself. Like when I've gone through a period of like personal growth, I really feel it when I go back to practice and play the violin. Like I can feel it in my body. I can feel it in sort of the way I'm listening. And music is kind of, as much as I want to use it, I'm very aware of the audience and want to reach out in that way. I also really feel like it's engage in own growth as a person. So I think that's in so many words, I think that's how I use it, or that's kind of what it means to me, and it feels very natural in that way for me.
Fantastic, fantastic. And last question before we let you go: do you feel like there's a way in which music makes a difference in the world?
Yeah, I'm hoping that. Yeah, I think music can be wielded in a way. I guess it's a bit reflected in the direction I'm moving in this interarts way. So I had this a colleague who comes from the theater world, and we were talking about if you go into a show thinking it's a theater show versus going to see a music show, what's the difference? And I feel like, and I put this question out to people actually, what were their personal expectations going into like these two different kinds of shows. And one answer that sort of kept coming out was this idea that music was kind of an inner, reflective, personal journey, and that theater was a bit more like there are more senses activated and you're brought along a story. Right. And I think there's something really beautiful about music, sort of, that the truth, this feeling of truth you get from goosebumps when you've heard something that sort of transcends whatever the form is that you're hearing, or sort of like tears or something like that, that there's something that is a universal truth there that's not articulated as much in words, let's say, again, to go back to the words thing. But yeah, there's a truth there that I think music can touch on for people that I think is very valuable and powerful.
I find that at this point in my life, there's more of a feeling that sound can heal in a very deep way, in a way that I kind of felt when I was a kid. And when you're surrounded by a lot of music as a kid, maybe you are aware of certain things, but as you get older and you look back at those memories, you see how deeply they kind of attach themselves to you. And so for me, if as an example now, if I feel really tired and I need a boost of energy, there are certain types of music that I know I can rely on to somehow kind of go deep into the cell structure and regenerate something from within. And then suddenly I'm fine and I'm wide awake and I'm able to get going. And, it's an incredibly powerful force that way, because it weaves its way into us and then activates us in a way that's incredibly powerful. As opposed to, I'm here by one of my bookshelves, as opposed to like picking up a book and I have a memory of a book, say, oh, I really like that book, I could read a phrase. It wouldn't necessarily give me the same kind of instant connection to a memory that's that deep.
Yeah. And since it's Father's Day, I'll just say this one thing to reference my dad, is that I used to play in the symphony in Kitchener for a few years, and my father, who didn't go to the symphony as much, started to come more often. And at one point later on in the season, he sort of turned to me and said, your quality of life does get better if you go to concerts.
Well, isn't that one of the latest things that we're seeing now? It's like a thing on Facebook. Like your longevity goes up when you go to concerts. Yeah. Well, Leslie, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I'm really happy that you're going to be joining us this summer.
My pleasure, me too.
Yeah, and I look forward to welcoming you to Stratford very soon. Take care of yourself.
Thank you, you too.